All right, now this really turn the deck on you. It's just horrifying. A 17-year-old girl is suing a county in Washington state because she was abused daily by her sex offender grandfather. Now, this sad story begins when she's just 6 years old. She's at the center of a custody battle again in Washington state. Her dad claims her mom is negligent. The court agrees to transfer custody to him. But living in the same house as dad, the girl's grandfather, his dad, who's a convicted sex offender. The court investigator knows this, but recommends the move anyway, the switch in custody. She lived through a decade of abuse. Grandfather has been convicted of molesting his granddaughter. He's spending 25 years in prison for that. So what about the lawsuit? She's suing for $5–10 million. Should the county be held accountable for the horror she lived through? Joining me to talk about this, Tony Lystra, Washington State Daily News, has been covering this story. Also with us, Lincoln Beauregard, the attorney representing this young girl, is at the center of this case. Lincoln, I read this story, and it is horrifying. I'm sure horrifying for so many. How did your client end up in the same home as her sex offender grandfather? And he's a guy who was convicted of raping a 10-year-old before that.
Well, this case, the history on this case is that there was a custody battle between the mother and the father, and the records suggest that the father's grandparents, the molester and his wife, were kind of the moving force behind this effort to get my client in the home. What happens as a matter of process in these circumstances is that the court is what's called a family court investigator, who's supposed to go out and kind of evaluate the fitness of the parents and trying to evaluate the fitness of the home where the child's going to be placed. Well, there was a limited disclosure on the part of the father indicating that his father, the grandfather, the molester, had a history of sexually abusing a child, but the characterization in that particular instance was inaccurate. It was a suggestion that the earlier victim of the grandfather was a 16-year-old girl and it was consensual, whereas in truth, our court reveal that it was a much more serious incident involving what my client understands to have been as a 10-year-old girl and some pretty severe forms of sexual abuse.
Oh, brother.
Under either circumstance, my client shouldn't have been placed in the home. No. Particularly not in the circumstance of if the true history had been actually researched and disclosed to the court.
Let's bring Tony Lystra in on this. Tony, what is the county saying about this?
The county isn't saying a whole lot at this point. As a matter of fact, last time I talked with them, the attorney had not yet seen the claim, so they're waiting to comment.
Okay. Now, the investigator, Tony, is he even working for the county anymore, or is he long gone? He's long gone. That's the one thing the county did say, is that the investigator is no longer working for the family court. Okay. Lincoln, who are you going after here? You're going for that? You're going after the county, right? And I'm sure the investigator and everybody concerned with this, these egregious errors that were made.
Well, I think it's important when you use terminology like going after to remember that the focus from my client is basically justice. And justice in this instance comes from, one, making people aware of what happened so it doesn't happen again.
Right.
And then secondarily, you know, the justice system is about trying to bring about some form of remediation to somebody who's in my client's position, and you know, so that's what this case is about. I wouldn't like to characterize it as going after somebody, though.
Right. Well, and I hopefully understand the terminology. When we hear these details, I'm sure, well, I'm only speaking for myself, but our viewers as well are just horrified to think a girl at the age of 6 molested daily, from what it sounds like, by her own grandfather. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to bring in Stacey Honowitz as well, as we look at how this could happen, how an again, how a 6-year-old could end up in a home with her sex offender grandfather. Just unconscionable to me. Call in 1-877 tell HLN's the number. Welcome back to Prime News on HLN. Again, we're continuing conversation. It's unconscionable what happened to a young girl. She's 6 years old. She ends up in the custody of her father, but the father was living with that man, his own dad, who is a convicted sex offender, convicted of raping a 10-year-old. So what happens? This man abused his own granddaughter for the better part of 10 years. Well, now that granddaughter's fighting back. She's 17, and she's filing a lawsuit against the county because they put her in custody with him, and she endured the hell that she did for the better part of a decade. We're taking your calls. Marie's with us in Connecticut. Marie, doesn't this just break your heart to hear this?
Oh, it does more than break my heart. It's a shame. First of all, what was wrong with the father? If you know, did she tell her father? Was there something wrong there? She didn't want to talk to her father?
Well, that's a good point, because the father was not a great guy. He wasn't around a lot. I think he was in prison a lot. Let's get our reporter, Tony Lystra, in on that. What about the father? Because he was all fearful of his own dad being around his little girl, wasn't he?
Well, the report that was submitted to family court indicates that, as Lincoln said, he told the court investigator that his father had been convicted of having a sexual relationship with a 16-year-old when, in fact, it had been a 10-year-old.
Right.
And the family court investigator noted in 3 different places in the report, the recommendation that he handed over to the court, that the little girl should not be left alone with her paternal grandfather.
Tony, no, that's a great point. I want to bring in Stacey Honowitz again, a sex crimes prosecutor, supervises the sex crimes unit in Florida. Stacey, help understand this. How could this happen if you have an investigator and they're basically saying this little girl who's 6 should not be alone with her own grandfather? That's almost impossible. They're in the same house. How are you putting this little girl in that situation in the first place?
God, I wish I had the answers, because it is preposterous and it's disgusting, quite frankly. I mean, if the investigator who's chosen to investigate, that's what his job is, notes in his record that she shouldn't be alone, why would he let it happen? Why wouldn't he say, she shouldn't be alone because I'm fearful she could be abused? I think the is creative. I think it's necessary. I think it opens the eyes and sets a precedent for investigators when they red flag or they note something that they better take it seriously. And I think it's important. It's a lesson for kids, too. You better tell someone, if you are touched, if you're abusive, that someone can get you out of that situation. Let's
get a call in. Nancy's with us in Texas. Nancy, your thoughts here?
Yes, I am calling because I think that child should be compensated as much money as possible that she can get from that state for placing her in the situation that she was placed in, knowing that grandfather was a child molester.
Yeah, she's seeking $5 to $10 million. Stacey, you think they have a good case? You think she's going to be awarded?
I'll tell you why I think the case really has legs, has merit to it, because there was a knowing, there was a disclosure. In other words, if that child was put into the house and nobody knew that he carried on a sexual relationship or that he was a child molester, that's a different story if it was never disclosed. But you have an investigator that knew something, enough to note it 3 times in a report, and I think that in and of itself spells I mean, basically it was warning, and then they didn't do anything about it. So I think that this lawsuit is very interesting. I think it's really worth following, and I really do hope that she, gets compensated.
Yeah, we will continue to follow the story. Tony, thanks for your time. Stacey, we appreciate you as well. We have more Prime News coming up. Breaking news in the search for missing Florida girl Haley Cummings. Dozens of divers and boats are at a river just 5 miles from her home where she was last seen. What are they looking for? What will they find?